Yo, what is up everybody? Season's greetings, welcome back to the channel, and today I've got a special one for you. I wanted to do something to ring in the holiday season here, or as I'll be calling it, the McHoliday season.
Oh, brother!
We're going to be checking out the Home Alone games for the 8 and 16-bit platforms on Sega and Nintendo to coincide with the film, of course, of the same name, which needs absolutely no introduction. What can be said about this movie that hasn't already been said? It released in November of 1991, pretty much became an instant Christmas classic, not to mention has become a yearly tradition for a lot of us around the globe. I know I end up watching it pretty much almost every year, and I think the simple reason, the simple fact that that is because it's just such a great distillation of the Christmas and holiday spirit, and it's just a wonderful film in so many ways. Obviously, Macaulay Culkin himself, a young performance at like 11 years old, he absolutely crushes it, and he was really a shining example of what a lot of us wanted to be, just an absolutely cool, badass, fun character. And he ends up saving the house from the wet bandits, Harry and Marv, including a great performance by Joe Pesci. Also, Catherine O'Hara as Kevin's mom, wonderful performance there. Just all around, just well written, well performed, well acted. Incredible film. Now, that being said, the games themselves maybe did not quite get the same care and attention. And I wanted to take a deep dive into these games because I do feel like a lot of people write them off instantly as being absolutely terrible and having no redeeming qualities, and I wanted to see for myself if that was really the case. I wanted to share with you guys how I felt about playing them and give you guys some insight as to which ones are maybe worth playing and the ones that maybe aren't. So let's get into it, guys. Now, the first game we'll be starting with is the one that came out first, and this one actually released in October of 91, kind of preempting the actual release of the film and maybe to try and build up some hype for the actual theatrical release, and that is the NES version of Home Alone. Now, this is one that we have covered in the past. It did make my 100 worst NES games video, which honestly, after having played more of it, I still concur that I put it in the right spot, but I did learn more about the game, and I do want to share some of that info and advice here. This was developed by Bethesda Softworks, of all people, which we are no strangers to on this channel. It was also published by THQ, and unfortunately, this combination was not a very good one, and I must say that I have to stand by where I put it in my NES games video. I do think this is, unfortunately, a bad game, but I do have a little bit more of an appreciation for it now that I've sunk decently more time into it, and by that I mean more than a couple hours actually. Essentially, the goal is you are Kevin, you are thrown in the McAllister household. The wet bandits, Harry and Marv, are after you pretty much right away, and literally your only goal in this one is to survive for 20 minutes, and that is all you have to do in this game. It sounds simple, but it actually is quite challenging, and essentially the way you're supposed to be able to make it through the 20 minutes is you have these items that are spread across the house, and they're these little boxes, these really crappy looking boxes. They look horrible. The presentation here is not very good at all, but essentially the idea is to grab these boxes, and they give you different sorts of traps that you can set that Harry and Marv will hopefully hit. It will hinder their progress. It usually stuns them for at least a few seconds and allows you to continue to make your escape, this wild goose chase throughout the McAllister household. Unfortunately, that is really all there is to this. Now, you do get multiple levels of the house, you get the tree house outside, you get the basement below, but pretty much in terms of core gameplay, like, that is all you have. You are just expected to be able to drop enough traps, keep them off you long enough, and be able to survive the 20 minutes vanilla, which I spent a good amount of time trying to do. I spent a good couple hours trying to beat the game legit, and I frankly couldn't do it. It just happens that you either run out of items stop spawning after a while, they're harder to get, you have to start really scrounging around the deep, dark depths of this house to find stuff, and a lot of times Harry and Marv will split off and they'll splinter in their paths. You'll get cornered at the perfectly wrong time, and that happened to me a number of times throughout this game. And eventually what I actually had to do to win this game was to use an exploit, and essentially how it works is if you're able to drop an item on the porch outside of the house next to the gutter that runs up to the storm drain, you can actually manage to get them to crawl up the gutter and actually get stuck indefinitely. The way that I was able to to win was getting both Harry and Marv stuck on this gutter and then just sitting there for the 20 minutes to run out the clock. What do you get for finishing this game, for surviving the 20 minutes? You get a really janky little pixelated mess that shows Harry and Marv getting cuffed up by the cops and you smiling in the window. No text, no sort of exposition, and then it cuts you back to the title screen. And that is pretty much all there is to say about this game. I think overall, while I can have some stupid fun with the breakability of it, being able to get the character AI stuck, other than that, this is a very abysmal game. There is not much to it, and in terms of replay value, there really isn't a whole lot here. I think this is the worst Home Alone game of the ones I'm going to cover here today, and for those reasons, I have to give this 2 iron to the face Daniel Stearns out of 5. And now that we've gotten Nintendo's 8-bit offering out of the way, I do want to move things over to the Sega side of things, and of course that means we're going to be covering the Master System version of Home Alone. Thought I was going to say Genesis, weren't you? We'll get to that one soon enough. This is the lesser known of the Sega ones, I would say. That is partially because it is one of many Sega Master System games that seem to only get a PAL release, did not come out in North America. Not only that, but I think it's the latest one that we're going to be talking about here today, because I couldn't quite get a concrete release date for this one, but as far as I could tell from various sources online, it came out at some point between 92 and as late as 1993, which for a game that based on a movie that came out in 1991 is a little surprising, a little long in the tooth, but honestly, I think the wait was worth it. This one trounces the NES one in just about every conceivable way, except for a couple very small caveats, which we'll get to later here. But first of all, the visuals here are a significant step up. Whereas the NES one was a bad looking NES game, we have a very nice looking Master System game, and considering the leap in hardware between NES and Master System was the more powerful machine. It takes full advantage of it here. This is by Probe Software, and they just had a really good knack for, even if maybe the gameplay wasn't exceptionally good, the visuals were usually very nice and took nice advantage of the hardware. This is one of many examples of that. But not only that, but the gameplay conceit here is a considerably amount better than the NES version. The NES had a nugget of a good idea with setting traps down for Harry and Marv to hit, but the execution was just so poorly done. And this one takes a very different approach. Instead of focusing on traps and catching Harry and Marv, really your goal is to find valuable objects in the stage. In the first stage, you start with just one, and it ratchets on up to 10 plus objects later on in the game, which we'll get to. Essentially, your goal is to find these objects while avoiding Harry and Marv. There is a BB gun that you have access to if you can find BBs in the stage, which will allow you to shoot them in order to stun them, but your goal is to avoid them mostly through the use of skillful platforming and really like juking your way around them, which I had some pretty fun moments kind of narrowly dodging them many times. And you're helped by the fact that if you press down and A, you can actually jump between levels, which is very nice and makes progression and just level traversal super nice. But yeah, you take these objects to the safe to keep away from Harry and Marv, and once you've collected enough in that stage, you move on to the next. Now, this game actually has 29 levels. You might think, how do you make a Home Alone game with that many levels? Well, they got a little creative with the level design. You start in the family home, but the game quickly devolves into having all these other different areas. You have a funhouse area, which has super bright, colorful, neon almost walls, and you got clowns and arcade machines. You also have a haunted house zone. Oh shoot, need some water. You also have a haunted house zone with coffins and really spooky candles and all that sort of stuff, as well as a greenhouse zone. And probably the weirdest one to me, just because, I mean, not that any of these really connect to the movie at all, but especially this one, was the power house, which is pretty much just an industrial area that looks like a factory, but you also have these like springboards to jump off of, which are pretty fun. Once again, make traversing these levels quite fun. And I think the main reason that this game is significantly better is just the movement is really nice and satisfying, and you feel like you're working toward a goal instead of just waiting around to win. This gameplay style will carry over into another version of the game that we'll talk about here shortly, but overall I would say this one is pretty solid. Additionally, you get an ending that's like a proper ending. Once you finish level 29, which is the last level, you do get a couple little screenshots with some sprites of Kevin, as well as a very scary image of of Catherine O'Hara as his mom. This will probably give me nightmares. Apologies in advance to all of you. But yeah, it basically just says, well done, you know, you're no longer home alone, which to me is better than pretty much the nothing we got on NES. So I got to give it credit there. Overall, this one is a little flawed. I will say, if you are looking to play it, also be warned that I initially tried to play this on my NTSC Genesis, and this is a PAL game. Most of the time PAL games run fine, but this was one of those instances where it didn't quite work so well, and I actually had to switch to emulator. I had a really strange set of different issues. First of all was the dog in the first stage actually getting caught and not being able to move, and actually getting dragged as you went across the stage. Kind of creepy stuff of nightmares. I know, for a Christmas game, kind of spooky. Also, Harry and Marv got stuck and just wouldn't move. Their AI would stop entirely, in addition to the timer freezing and not being able to complete the level at all. So no, there are some game-breaking bugs, but I can't really fault the game for that. That's more to do with setup problems. Overall, I would say this one is worth playing. It is a little long in the tooth. I don't necessarily think 29 levels was really justified. As you get further into the game and you have to get 10 items in some instances, Kevin can only carry 3, so you end up going back and forth between the safe and grabbing the items quite often, and it does kind of hinder the gameplay a little bit. Overall, though, I would say this is worth checking out if you want to see a decent 8-bit version of the game. I'd have to give this one 3.5 Screaming Catherine O'Hara's out of 5. And now we are going to jump back to Nintendo and cover the SNES version of Home Alone. And this is one that we are no strangers to if you've been watching the channel for any length of time. If you saw the 100 Worst SNES Games video, it did get a placement there, albeit in tough sell. After having played this game to completion for the sake of this video, I think, honestly, having despite played it way less for that video, I think I was pretty much on the money. I do think this one is a tough sell. Now, like the Master System version, the gameplay conceit here is the same. You are going through the houses, trying to find valuable objects to put in a safe to keep away from Harry and Marv. The biggest aspect where this game separates itself from the Master System version probably is in the way that you find these objects. And what I mean is that the Master System version, especially later in the game, had some objects that were hidden that you had to open other objects to find, whereas this game really doubles down on that concept. And I would say the majority of the items that you have to find here are hidden either in cupboards or drawers or behind paintings for some reason, or in laundry hampers or in bathtubs. Just wherever they can squeeze items, they will. They're almost never visible from the get. This makes it quite a bit harder to actually finish these stages, in addition to the fact that you just need way more objects than in the Sega Master System version. I'm talking like dozens of objects in some of these stages. Now, luckily, Kevin's carry capacity is quite a bit higher in this game. In fact, late game, you can carry up to 8 objects at once, which means there is less of having to go back and forth to these safes in order to drop off items, which is nice. It's just much longer in the tooth, and honestly, I feel like this game absolutely overstays its welcome. Even though it is significantly less stages than the Master System version, it feels a lot longer. Now, another big aspect, a differentiating aspect in this one, is the fact that there are these basement sections. After you grab all the objects you need, you get a key to unlock the basement, and then you can go downstairs, and you have to get to the safe actually to move on to the next level. You've been basically throwing these items down dumbwaiters this whole time, and your goal is to get to the safe in order to progress. Depending on which level you're in, you'll either have rats or spiders trying to impede your progress. Honestly, I feel like this was an unnecessary addition to the gameplay formula, and once you get toward the end of the stage, a lot of times there will be like a boss, and it's just like the most silly, brain-dead sort of bosses. You end up hitting this, basically this stone in the middle of the basement in order to drop down on the enemy, and that's how you deal damage. It's just very weak boss fights. There's a ghost one that is absolutely silly and ridiculous. While it did make me chuckle a little bit in terms of the actual gameplay, it was quite abysmal. Another aspect where this one differs from the Master System is actually also the combat as well. Obviously, Harry and Marv are after you. In addition, in this one, with some goons, like mafioso style goons, just at random points in the levels. And for the most part, you can actually take out all of these enemies you get a water gun at the start, but there is also some upgraded weaponry you can grab later, which will actually not only stun them, but in some instances kill them and wipe them off the screen. They actually like fall. Speaking of glitching through the floors, they actually fall through the floors, which is kind of a funny death animation. They make the dumbest sound when you end up killing them. But overall, yeah, this one is, I would say, honestly, a step back from the Master System version. I think I would sooner play the Master System game. You do get an ending in this one that is a little bit more fleshed out. You actually get to see Harry and Marv get put in prison, which is pretty funny. And a lot of these images are just taken straight from the films themselves. And in fact, in the prison cell with Harry and Marv, you can tell it's like an outdoor scene, even though they're indoors in this prison. It's kind of a janky ending, but it honestly made the game worth finishing, for me at least. Like I said, I do still think overall, in terms of like just core gameplay, it was significantly less satisfying. So I would have to give this one 3, trying not to swear, Joe Pesci's out of 5. And now that we got the Super Nintendo version out of the way, that leaves us with one more version of the game to cover in this video. And this is, I'm just going to say it, far and away the best version of Home Alone that I have yet to play. And that is the Genesis version here. The 16-bit Sega one absolutely gets the win here. I did own this game, and I have played it before, but I was missing out on some pretty major mechanics. I did manage to beat the game with like a major caveat, which we'll get into later. I just barely managed to get credits on this game, but for the sake of this video, I spent a significant amount of time sitting down with it, playing it, learning the ins and outs, learning all the different mechanics, and I actually have beat the game on expert difficulty a few times here now, and I gotta say, this is a super rewarding game. I could say a lot about this game, but I'm gonna try and be as brief and concise as possible and just hit the most important points. The first of which is, you'll notice right away when you boot up the game, you actually start as Kevin, not inside a home, but outside on a sled, which is really fun. And you'll notice immediately that there is this neighborhood of multiple houses surrounding you. Not only do you have kind of the basic McAllister family home, but also you get these other homes, including like a colonial style house, you get a future home, you get an abandoned house, and your goal is to actually protect all 5 of the homes in this neighborhood from Harry and Marv the Wet Bandits, from ransacking them, from ending up flooding the homes and ruining them, which I thought was not only an ingenious idea from a gameplay standpoint, but it also ends up getting a lot of that visual variety that the other games craved, but didn't really manage to make logical sense of. Basically separate the homes, have each home have a different style, so you still got that kind of change of scenery, and it actually makes sense in the world of the game. So I gotta give the devs kudos to that. It's such a smart move on their part. And at the start of the game, you get a couple minutes to kind of prepare, and you can do multiple things during this period. In addition to going around trying to collect items, which we'll get to later, each house, once you enter it, you actually get a blueprint screen that gives you a whole host of traps on the left-hand side that you can place at various different spots in the home. Now, this is a little tricky to utilize, especially not knowing where the bandits will show up. They do choose their first house at random, so you kind of have to guess. Random luck here, random chance. Honestly, if you play long enough, they'll hit every house, so you can kind of spread them out evenly as you want, or front load them all into one, but you get a whole host of different options, including oil slicks, ice that you can put on the floor, the torch, of course, in the doorway that you can end up flaming Harry and Marv with later. A whole host of different objects that really enhance the experience once you're actually in the house and starting to go face to face with Harry and Marv here. And once the first couple minutes of the timer elapse and your setup is over, Harry and Marv will emerge from the bottom right-hand corner of the screen in their van and select one of the 5 houses at random in order to start ransacking. And my suggestion to you would be, despite how much progress you've made, despite how many traps you've set, how many items you've got, follow them into that first house, because if you leave them unattended, they will very quickly loot and eventually ruin the house. So you got to be very much on your toes, on your A game. Because there are items in the house, you do have time to scavenge while dealing with them. And you'll notice once you jump in, there are multiple meters on the right-hand side. You have not only an ammo meter, but the loot meter, the blue meter, which at all costs you do not want to let Harry and Marv fill. They will go around the house and hit these different points, and they will kind of dig through and try to scavenge what they can. Once they hit every spot in the house, it's game over. They will flood the house, so you don't want that to happen. You might be thinking, okay, so how do we stop them from looting these houses? Well, the simple answer, and if you've watched the movie, it makes a lot of sense. You inflict as much pain as Kevin McAllister can absolutely muster on Harry and Marv, to the point where they run out screaming and yelling. Yes, it is absolutely brutal. You do start with the BB gun. This will get you a little bit of the way in. It does inflict a minuscule amount of damage, and it doesn't stun them for very long. So use it at the start to get your feet wet, but you'll eventually want to grab more items and hopefully start crafting your own weapons, which to me is the biggest part of this game. There's a weapon crafting system in this Genesis game, which is mind-blowing to me. I feel like that was a big deal even like 15, 20 years after this came out. But the fact that this game is doing this in the early 90s is mind-blowing. And essentially you're collecting these items. Certain combinations of items will create new weapons for Kevin to use, many of which will deal a lot more damage than the base BB gun, but also are just super fun to utilize. There's stuff such as snowball mortars, you have pepper launchers, and each one has a really fun different animation for when Harry and Marv get hit by them. And like I said, a lot of them will start doing a lot of damage pretty quick, so you are just going to inflict as much pain and damage on these guys as humanly possible. The pain meter will fill, they'll run out of the house, and essentially you are once again stalling the clock. So in a weird way, it does kind of take some cues from the NES game, but just absolutely trounces it in every single regard. On easy mode, you do have 20 minutes before the cops arrive. In expert mode, you actually double that to 40 minutes, and you got to keep them at bay for 40 minutes. The goal is to save all 5 houses. If you don't save all 5, you do technically still get credits as long as there's at least one house standing, and that's initially how I beat the game on easy, was with one house, because I actually wasn't aware that there was a weapon crafting system, and so I'd run out of ammo and be like, well, I guess I'm screwed. I would stall them out in the last house by basically jumping into their arms, because if they catch you, they will actually put you on a coat hanger, and that actually kills a lot of time if you just repeatedly do that. So if you're in a pinch and you're out of ammo, that is one way of helping you out. Also, some of the houses do have snowmen right outside, and so you can kind of farm those for other items and ammo as well, which can help if you're in a pinch. But overall, this game is just so fun. It distills everything that makes the film great, that makes the ideas from the other games that attempted this sort of thing kind of good. It just takes everything about the film and about what the other games tried to do and just puts together this wonderful combination of different gameplay elements, and is a super satisfying time. Really just blew me away. The more I dug into this game and the deeper I went, the more I realized how mechanically kind of complex it was. Just a lot of fun. So this one, I absolutely have to give 4.5 screaming Kevin McAllisters out of 5. And there you have it, y'all. Those are the 8 and 16-bit Home Alone games on the Sega and Nintendo consoles. Have you played any of the games? If you have, let me know what you thought of them. I may or may not cover the Home Alone 2 games in the future. That would take quite a bit more patience, and I don't know if I have it in me to suffer through those versions of the game. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your holiday season, and until next time, guys, take care. I hope to see you all very soon.
So yeah, to wrap things up, and in the spirit of the holiday season, I just want to say, Merry Christmas, you filthy animals.